Imagine standing in an airport terminal, ticket in hand, exhausted from a week that felt like it lasted a year. All you want is to settle into your seat, hear the steady hum of the airplane engines, and drift into a well-earned rest. But in an instant, what should have been a routine boarding experience spirals into an unexpected confrontation. A gate agent blocks your path, questioning whether you even belong there. Onlookers exchange confused glances as tension thickens in the air, until a surprising figure steps into the spotlight. This is a story of prejudice, hidden power, and an unforgettable moment of karma. Naomi Ellis had flown more times than she could count in her 38 years. As a highly successful entrepreneur and the largest private investor in Orion Airlines, she was accustomed to airport lounges, first-class boarding, and the occasional nod from those who understood her influence. Yet somehow, on a humid July afternoon at Houston Grandview International Airport, her status seemed to disappear into thin air. Standing at gate C-14, Naomi was dressed in a sleek navy pantsuit, paired with stylish yet practical heels. Her long braids cascaded down her back, and her posture exuded the quiet confidence she had honed through years of high-stakes corporate negotiations. A small carry-on bag rested by her side, and her phone buzzed in her hand, an update on her flight. The trip to Chicago was delayed due to a late inbound aircraft. Around her, weary travelers grumbled, shifting impatiently in the crowded gate area. But Naomi took the delay in stride. It was an inconvenience, sure, but nothing she couldn't manage. She planned to use the extra time to respond to a few pressing emails. What she didn't plan for was the scrutinizing gaze of the gate agent, a woman named Carolyn Shaw, whose Orion Airlines name tag was perched on her uniform like a badge of authority. Carolyn was a short woman with tightly curled auburn hair pinned back, and her sharp eyes darted between passengers, as if she were on the lookout for any potential disruption. When Naomi approached the counter to inquire about the possibility of an earlier flight, Carolyn's expression hardened. "May I help you?" Carolyn asked, her tone making it clear she wasn't particularly interested in doing so. Naomi offered her warmest professional smile, expecting a simple exchange about flight details. Little did she know that this ordinary moment would trigger a chain of events that would expose a deeply ingrained bias and the true extent of Naomi's power. Carolyn held out her hand, signaling for Naomi's ticket as if it might not belong to her. The suspicion was subtle, but Naomi had spent enough years in boardrooms to recognize the undertones instantly. At first, she chose to overlook it. Maybe Carolyn was just having a bad day. "I'm booked in first class," Naomi said calmly, tapping on her phone to retrieve her digital boarding pass. Naomi never flaunted her status or influence within Orion Airlines. In fact, most people had no idea who she was. Her name wasn't on any public shareholder boards, and she preferred to stay behind the scenes. That anonymity usually worked in her favor, allowing her to observe how the airline truly operated without special treatment. But today, it was working against her. Carolyn glanced at Naomi's phone, then back at her face, as if searching for some discrepancy, some reason to deny what she was seeing. "Sure you are," Carolyn muttered under her breath, just loud enough for Naomi to hear, but low enough that it could be brushed off as an innocent remark. Naomi felt a flicker of irritation, but kept her composure. "Yes, I am," she replied, her voice firm but controlled. "Flight 319 to Chicago, seat 2A. Carolyn blinked, her fingers swirling over the computer mouse before she pursed her lips. "It shows here that you're on the wait list for an upgrade," she announced, her voice intentionally loud enough to carry through the gate area. "You're not cleared for first class." A murmur rippled through the passengers nearby. Naomi felt a wave of indignation wash over her. There was something almost humiliating about the way Carolyn said it, as if Naomi had been caught trying to sneak into a place where she didn't belong. Maintaining her calm, Naomi reached into her purse and retrieved the printed boarding pass that clearly displayed seat 2A. But before she could hand it over, Carolyn waved her off dismissively. "I'm sure you have a seat," Carolyn said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But if you have an issue, you'll need to speak with customer service about your upgrade status." Naomi frowned. Something wasn't adding up. She had received her confirmed first-class seat days ago. She had the email, the confirmation, everything. But according to Carolyn, she was suddenly on a wait list, and Naomi had a sinking feeling that this wasn't just an unfortunate mistake. Naomi's fingers tightened around the flimsy slip of paper in her hand. 29C, a middle seat wedged between strangers at the back of the plane. The sharp contrast between this and the first-class seat she had paid for and confirmed days ago was infuriating. Still, she didn't lash out. That wasn't her style. Instead, Naomi took a slow breath, stepping away from the counter. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was just a technical error, a mix-up that could be easily corrected. She had 30 minutes before boarding began, plenty of time to straighten things out. Pulling out her phone, she dialed the one person she knew would get to the bottom of this. Leah Foster, her executive assistant. Leah was a force of nature, a woman whose energy seemed limitless and whose problem-solving skills were unmatched. If something was amiss, Leah would find out why and fix it. Naomi barely had to explain before Leah's voice rose on the other end. "Are you serious?" she nearly shouted. "This is absurd. You have a verified seat. You even have the email confirmation. Hold on, I'm going to dig into this." Naomi forwarded her assistant every document she had, her original ticket, her seat confirmation, everything. Then she scrolled through her phone, double-checking her emails for any sign that her reservation had changed. Nothing. No cancellation. No downgrade notification. No reason why, in the span of a few minutes, she'd gone from a confirmed first-class passenger to someone being treated like an inconvenience. Something wasn't right. As Naomi waited for Leah's callback, she noticed Aaron Tate, a customer service representative at the adjacent counter. Hoping for a second opinion, she stepped over and briefly explained the situation. Aaron frowned, his fingers flying over the keyboard. His expression darkened as he read the screen. "I see a note here that your seat was downgraded," he said, eyes narrowing. "But there's no listed reason for it. That's unusual. Let me check with Carolyn. She's overseeing this flight." Naomi forced herself to stay calm. She had dealt with corporate bureaucracy before. But watching it play out so blatantly, in the middle of a crowded terminal, was a different level of frustration. If she were any other passenger, she might have had no choice but to accept it. But Naomi wasn't just any passenger. From where she stood, Naomi watched as Carolyn, the same gate agent who had doubted her just moments ago, walked over to Aaron. The interaction was brief, but telling. Carolyn leaned in too close, her body language domineering. She spoke in hushed tones, but Naomi noticed the way her hand flicked toward her in a subtle, dismissive gesture. Whatever Carolyn was saying, she wanted Aaron to stop asking questions. Moments later, Aaron returned, looking visibly uneasy. "Miss Ellis," he said hesitantly, "please wait just a moment. I'm sure there's a misunderstanding." Naomi crossed her arms. "I certainly hope so." The line at the counter had grown. Naomi could feel the weight of curious glances pressing on her. Other passengers who had overheard pieces of the conversation, who were now waiting to see what would happen next. She hated this. She was used to operating behind closed doors, negotiating in sleek boardrooms where she controlled the narrative. But here, in the middle of a packed terminal, she had no control over the spectacle unfolding around her. Carolyn returned, her face unreadable. "Ma'am," she began in a clipped, rehearsed tone. "We've done all we can. The seat you claim to have had is no longer available. You can either accept the reissued seat or wait for another flight." Naomi felt her temper fray. "I don't claim to have had the seat. I did have it. It was confirmed. I have no record of it being changed. I deserve a valid explanation for why it was reassigned." Carolyn gave a nonchalant shrug. "We can't always control last-minute adjustments. Perhaps the seat was double-booked, or the flight is overbooked." Lies. Naomi could see it in the way Carolyn's eyes gleamed, the way she seemed to enjoy the power she held in that moment. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't about an overbooked flight. This was personal. Before Naomi could say another word, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Attention passengers on Orion Flight 319 to Chicago. We will begin boarding in a few minutes. First-class passengers and families with small children are welcome to board first." At that moment, Naomi's phone buzzed. "Leah," she answered instantly. "Naomi, listen up," Leah said, her voice sharp with urgency. "I reached a contact in the Executive Resolution Department. They pulled your reservation and confirmed, Your seat, 2A, was never changed. There's no record of a downgrade on file. Something else is going on. Naomi's grip tightened on her phone. Do you want me to patch them in? Naomi didn't even hesitate. Yes. Naomi's mind raced. The CEO. A few days earlier, she had exchanged emails with Ryan Whitmore, the CEO of Orion Airlines, regarding an upcoming quarterly review. Though he technically answered to the board of directors, Naomi, as the largest private shareholder, held significant influence over the company's direction. She had never used that power for personal matters. Ever. But this wasn't just about her. It was about something bigger. Still, she decided to wait a few more minutes, giving the Executive Resolution Department time to resolve the issue. She stood still, controlling her expression, ignoring the curious glances and the subtle smirks from Carolyn, the gate agent who seemed far too pleased with herself. Naomi could guess exactly what Carolyn was thinking, that she was just another passenger trying to game the system, another person who didn't belong in first class. What Carolyn didn't know, she had just messed with the wrong person. Boarding began. First-class passengers were called. Naomi watched as businessmen in tailored suits stepped forward, handing their passes to Carolyn. She smiled at them, exchanged pleasantries, and scanned their tickets with an easy efficiency. For a moment, Naomi considered walking straight up to the counter. But no, she wasn't going to give Carolyn a reason to deny her again, not without solid proof. Then, Naomi's phone lit up again. A direct call. She answered instantly. Ms. Ellis? Hi, this is Sarah Caldwell from Orion Airlines Executive Resolution Department. We've confirmed on our end. Seat 2A absolutely belongs to you. There is no record of a downgrade or reassignment. I sincerely apologize for the confusion, and I'm updating the flight manifest right now to reflect your rightful seat. Naomi exhaled sharply, relief washing over her. Thank you, Sarah. Can you ensure the gate agent, Carolyn, receives that update? Absolutely. She should see it in her system any moment now. Naomi hung up, waited 30 seconds. Then, with quiet confidence, she stepped forward to board, her rightful first-class ticket in hand. The first-class line was nearly empty now. Naomi approached the counter, expecting minimal fuss. Instead, Carolyn looked up, eyes narrowing the second she saw her. I already told you, ma'am, Carolyn said, crossing her arms. You're not in first class. The two businessmen standing behind Naomi shifted awkwardly, exchanging uncertain glances. Naomi took a deep breath, refusing to rise to the bait. If you check the flight manifest again, she said, keeping her voice calm but firm, you'll see that seat 2A is confirmed in my name. Carolyn's expression didn't change, but she turned back to her computer. A few clicks, a slight pause, a tightening of her jaw. Naomi caught it immediately, the brief flicker of realization crossing Carolyn's face. For a split second, she thought it was over. That Carolyn, finally faced with irrefutable proof, would have no choice but to hand over the boarding pass. But then, Carolyn's hand moved toward a button. A sharp beep rang out over the intercom. Security requested at gate C14. Naomi's heart slammed against her ribs. Gasps rippled through the small crowd forming behind her. The businessman took a step back, as if she had suddenly become radioactive. For a moment, Naomi's voice failed her. Then the crowd parted as two airport security officers approached. One an older man with salt and pepper hair, the other a younger woman with a sharp, no-nonsense stance. Carolyn pointed directly at Naomi. This passenger is attempting to board illegally in first class without a valid ticket, she announced. Please escort her away from the gate. Naomi felt her composure crack. Just slightly. She forced her voice to remain steady. I have my ticket, she said, holding it up for them to see. It's legitimate. Sarah Caldwell from your Executive Resolution Department just confirmed it. Check your system. But Carolyn didn't back down. Instead, she smirked. A slow, deliberate smirk. We have reason to believe your seat was illegally switched, she said, voice laced with triumph. And then, she winked. Naomi's stomach churned. This was a power play. A humiliation tactic. She recognized it instantly. The same kind of insidious discrimination she had faced before. The kind that was plausible enough to be excused, but calculated enough to cause harm. The security officers hesitated. The older man, Officer Grayson, frowned slightly, his instincts clearly at odds with Carolyn's accusation. Still, Naomi could feel the weight of countless eyes on her. Some sympathetic, some merely curious, some undoubtedly judgmental. And in that moment, she knew this wasn't just about a seat anymore. This was about principle. She refused to be pushed aside. Naomi stood her ground, her heartbeat steady but her resolve unshaken. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about power, about someone who had seen her skin color before her legitimacy, before her right to be there. She met the older security officer's gaze. "I demand to speak with a supervisor," she said, her voice unwavering. "I have proof. I'm not leaving." Carolyn sighed dramatically, as if Naomi's insistence was a personal inconvenience. "You're not in the right seat. That's final." And with that, Naomi realized there was no more room for politeness. She stepped aside, out of the way of other passengers boarding the plane. The two security officers, one older, Officer Grayson, the other younger and more rigid, flanked her. They hadn't laid a hand on her, but their presence made it clear that they could if things escalated. Nearby, Carolyn went back to scanning tickets, acting as if nothing unusual was happening. But Naomi wasn't backing down. Officer Grayson cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if you can produce documentation, we'll confirm and hopefully clear this up." A sliver of rationality. Naomi nodded, pulling up the official message from Sarah Caldwell, the executive resolution representative, clearly confirming her first-class seat. She held up her phone, the text in black and white. Officer Grayson leaned in, his eyes scanning the screen. Naomi watched as his frown deepened, his expression shifting to confusion. This looks legitimate," he said, turning toward the younger officer. But before they could say anything further, Carolyn's head snapped up. "Security," she barked, her voice sharp and commanding. "We have a flight to board. Please remove her from the gate area." The finality in her tone was like a gavel hitting a judge's bench. Naomi's stomach clenched. Would they listen to reason, or would they simply comply with Carolyn's false authority? Then, a voice cut through the tension. "That won't be necessary. The captain takes charge." The crowd shifted as a tall, commanding woman in a pilot's uniform strode forward. Captain Veronica Steele. Her presence was undeniable, the kind of authority earned from years in the sky, not just from a title. Naomi exhaled. A pilot was higher on the chain of command than a gate agent. This was the break she needed. "I was informed there was a problem with the manifest," Captain Steele said, her sharp eyes flicking between the officers and Carolyn. Carolyn, not missing a beat, repeated her accusation. "She's trying to board in a seat that isn't hers." Captain Steele turned to Naomi, professional but direct. "Ma'am, may I see your documentation?" Naomi handed over her phone without hesitation. The captain scrolled through the confirmation email, then tapped on her own iPad, presumably cross-referencing the official flight roster. Carolyn craned her neck, trying to see over her shoulder, her jaw tight with tension. Seconds later, Captain Steele raised an eyebrow. "Seat 2A is assigned to Ms. Naomi Ellis," she said, her voice calm but firm. "There is no record of a change in the system." Silence blanketed the gate area. Passengers in the boarding lane paused mid-step, straining to hear. For a brief moment, Naomi dared to hope it was over. But Carolyn wasn't finished. "Well, the system has been known to glitch," she spat, arms crossing defensively. "I was given instructions from a supervisor that this seat was not to be assigned to Miss Ellis. That's all I know." Captain Steele's expression darkened. "Which supervisor?" she asked, her tone shifting to something sharper, more dangerous. Carolyn hesitated, flustered. Naomi watched closely. This was the moment Carolyn's story would crumble. Instead of answering, she simply repeated herself. "I was told." Captain Steele's mouth pressed into a thin line. She didn't believe it, but she also didn't want to escalate the situation any further. Not with passengers watching. By now, the entire flight was boarded, except for Naomi. Some of the travelers already seated in first class peeked through the jet bridge window, their faces filled with curiosity. Captain Steele let out a measured sigh. "We need to push back in 15 minutes. Miss Ellis, come with me, please. Let's get this resolved so we can depart on time." Finally on board, but at what cost? Naomi followed the captain onto the jet bridge, flanked by the two security officers, who still looked unsure about the whole situation. Behind them, Carolyn stood stiffly at the gate counter, scanning more boarding passes, her expression unreadable. As Naomi walked down the corridor, she tried to steady her emotions. What should have been a straightforward boarding process had turned into a humiliating confrontation. But she wasn't broken, She had built her business empire by forging ahead when the world told her no, and in less than an hour, she'd be in the air. Heading home. Or so she hoped. Inside the aircraft, Naomi was greeted by a flight attendant, a woman named Tessa Morales. Her polite smile held a hint of tension, like she already knew what had just happened at the gate. The first-class cabin was already full. Naomi saw businessmen flipping through financial reports, a couple sharing a quiet conversation, a young professional pulling out a laptop. It was a world she belonged to, and yet she had just spent the last 20 minutes fighting for the right to sit there. Captain Steele gestured toward the open seat. "Please, Miss Ellis, have a seat. I'll speak with the gate agent and ensure your baggage is properly stowed. We'll sort this out." Naomi nodded, murmuring a quiet thank you before settling into 2A with a heavy sigh of relief. A flight attendant appeared beside her, offering a welcome drink. Naomi politely declined. Her nerves were still raw. She wasn't ready to celebrate just yet, because deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Naomi's fingers hovered over her phone, a lingering unease making it difficult to focus. She had just texted Leah, her ever-reliable assistant, finally seated in 2A. "I'll keep you posted." Leah's response came almost instantly. "Glad to hear it. I'll monitor everything from here." Naomi glanced around first class, scanning the faces of her fellow passengers. Usually, she kept to herself, maybe pulling out her laptop to review last-minute contracts. But tonight, an unsettling tension coiled in her stomach. Was this just Carolyn acting on personal bias? Or was there something more orchestrated at play? She had always given Orion Airlines the benefit of the doubt. After all, she believed in the company, invested in it, sat at the table when high-level decisions were made. And yet, here she was, experiencing firsthand the kind of discrimination that was supposed to be a relic of the past. A moment of triumph, a false sense of security. 15 minutes later, the plane's doors sealed shut and Naomi braced for takeoff. She put her phone on airplane mode, fastened her seatbelt, and leaned into the plush comfort of 2A. The flight attendants moved through their safety demonstration. The engines roared to life. As the Boeing 737 taxied toward the runway, Naomi let herself exhale a small sigh of relief. She hadn't been dragged off the flight. She hadn't been forcibly bumped to economy. She had fought and won. But Naomi had no idea that the real turbulence was still ahead, and it wouldn't come from the sky. 30 minutes into the flight, Naomi tried to settle in. She reviewed a few emails on the in-flight Wi-Fi, making sure her upcoming meetings in Chicago were still on track. A flight attendant passed through, offering drinks and snacks. Naomi accepted a glass of water, but declined anything else. Her nerves were still raw. She didn't want anything that might shake them further. Just as she was about to return to her email, she felt it. A light tap on her shoulder. Naomi turned. A tall male flight attendant, one she hadn't interacted with before, stood beside her. His name tag read Jason. His expression was stiff as he handed her a folded piece of paper. Naomi's pulse jumped. "What is this?" she asked, voice low. Jason's gaze flickered with discomfort. "A passenger and coach asked me to deliver it to you," he said. Then, before Naomi could ask anything else, he turned and hurried away. A chill ran up Naomi's spine. Slowly she unfolded the note. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were words that made her blood run cold. "You may have won this round, but watch your back. You don't belong here." Fear settles in. Naomi's breath hitched. She looked around the cabin, searching for anyone who might be watching her. Nothing. Everyone seemed completely unaware. She had never received a threat this direct before. She had dealt with hateful emails, online trolls, any prominent black woman in business had. But this was different. This was personal. This was immediate. And she was trapped in a confined space, 30,000 feet in the air, with whoever had written it. Naomi pressed the call button. A moment later, Tessa, the flight attendant who had greeted her earlier, appeared. "Everything all right, Miss Ellis?" Naomi handed her the note. Tessa's eyes widened in alarm as she read the words. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "Jason gave it to me. He said a passenger and coach asked him to deliver it." Tessa's face hardened. "That's unacceptable. Let me show the captain." Naomi nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. This wasn't just a random insult. It was connected to what had happened at the gate, to the fight for her seat. And now, she was left wondering, was this just a coward's anonymous threat? Or was she in actual danger? Minutes later, Tessa returned, this time with Captain Steele following behind. The pilot knelt beside Naomi's seat, lowering her voice. "Miss Ellis, I'm sorry you received this. This is entirely unacceptable." Naomi studied the captain's expression. She looked genuinely concerned. "Do you have any idea who sent it?" Naomi asked. Captain Steele shook her head. "Not without further investigation. We can't definitively identify the writer unless someone confesses. However, I will speak to the lead flight attendant and see what we can do to ensure your safety." Naomi nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and unease. She had no illusions. Identifying the sender was nearly impossible. Still, it meant something that the captain was taking it seriously. "Thank you," Naomi said, keeping her voice steady. "I'd prefer not to cause a scene, but I'd also like to feel secure." Captain Steele placed a firm hand on the armrest beside her. "We'll do our best to maintain a safe and respectful environment. I'm sorry this happened on my flight." Naomi offered a small nod, but her mind was spinning. This wasn't a coincidence. It was too connected to what had happened at the gate. Had someone overheard Carolyn's accusations? Had they decided that Naomi was somehow undeserving of first class? Or worse, had someone seen her win her seat back and taken personal offense? She didn't have the answers. But she knew one thing. This wasn't over. Naomi sat still, her body in first class but her mind elsewhere. She had no idea who had written the note. Maybe it was someone who thought she had cheated the system. Maybe it was just a random bigot who couldn't stand seeing a black woman in first class. Either way, there was an undercurrent of malice behind it. And it wasn't just paranoia. As the captain returned to the cockpit, Naomi forced herself to breathe slowly. She wasn't helpless. She was Naomi Ellis, a business magnate, an investor, a force of nature. She would not be intimidated, but she couldn't deny the feeling creeping in, the vulnerability that came from knowing someone had gone out of their way to remind her she didn't belong. For the rest of the flight, nothing else happened. No more notes. No passengers staring her down. No more blatant hostility. Yet, Jason, the flight attendant who had delivered the note, avoided eye contact as he passed by. Meanwhile, Tessa did her best to be attentive, checking in every so often, making sure Naomi was comfortable. Naomi spent the rest of the flight mentally drafting a report. She was going to escalate this. Not just the discrimination at the gate, but the disturbing threat on board. This wasn't just about her. It was about what it meant for every other black traveler who had been made to feel like they didn't belong. As the plane descended into Chicago, Naomi peered out the window. The city skyline came into view, a place that had built her, tested her, and made her the powerhouse she was today. And ironically, one of Airline's biggest hubs. As the wheels touched down, she felt a final wave of relief wash over her. She had made it. She hadn't been forced off the flight. She hadn't backed down. But the real battle? It was just beginning. An unexpected call. The seatbelt sign switched off. Naomi gathered her belongings, nodding at the flight attendants as she made her way out. Captain Steele stood near the cockpit door, waiting. As Naomi passed, the pilot gave her a knowing look. "Miss Ellis, please accept my personal apology. I encourage you to contact our corporate office. This kind of behavior, whether from airline staff or passengers, is not tolerated." Naomi nodded, forcing a small smile. "Thank you, Captain." She appreciated the sincerity, but she also knew the truth. One well-meaning pilot couldn't fix the systemic issues that allowed this to happen. Stepping off the plane, Naomi switched her phone off airplane mode. A flood of notifications appeared. One text stood out. It was from Leah. "Call me ASAP." Naomi didn't hesitate. She ducked into a quiet corner near the arrivals corridor and dialed. Leah answered on the first ring, her voice urgent. "Naomi, something big happened." Naomi's stomach tightened. "What is it?" "Ryan Whitmore found out about the gate incident." Naomi froze. "The CEO of Orion Airlines?" "He's furious," Leah continued. "He wants an emergency meeting with you, tomorrow morning." Naomi blinked, her anger momentarily overshadowed by curiosity. How did he find out so quickly? "I called someone in the executive resolution department. They reported it up the chain. And from there, it spread like wildfire. He's apparently livid that any investor, especially you, was treated this way." Naomi exhaled. She had plenty of emotions swirling: anger, exhaustion, frustration. But more than anything, resolve. "All right," she said. Let's plan on it. Have my notes ready. Leah's voice softened. Naomi, I'm sorry you had to go through this, but maybe this is the push needed for real change. Naomi didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure if she believed that yet. But if Ryan Whitmore wanted a meeting, then she would make sure he heard every single detail. Because this wasn't going to be swept under the rug. She made her way toward baggage claim, her steps brisk, her purpose clear. The fallout had only just begun. For Carolyn, for the airline, and for Naomi herself. The next morning, Naomi prepared for battle. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing. Ryan Whitmore didn't call emergency meetings for nothing. A black luxury sedan pulled up to the towering Orion Airlines headquarters in downtown Chicago. Naomi stepped out, clad in a tailored gray suit that exuded authority. Her hair was braided neatly back, her eyes holding an unyielding fire. Inside, security personnel recognized her name instantly and escorted her up to the executive floor. She walked through hushed corridors, lined with framed photos of Orion's legacy, historic aircraft, key moments in aviation history. Normally, Naomi's visits here were calm and strategic. Today, there was a palpable tension in the air. People were aware. Eyes flicked toward her, then away. They knew what had happened. They knew why she was here. Naomi entered the glass-walled conference room, where Leah was already waiting, laptop open, notes neatly arranged. Naomi gave her a grateful nod. Thanks for everything you did yesterday, she said, voice softer than before. Leah's eyes shone with quiet determination. Anything you need, Naomi, I've got you. Then, the door swung open. Ryan Whitmore stepped inside, flanked by two vice presidents. He was a tall man, known for his direct leadership style. Normally, he was cool, calculated, focused on Orion's business growth. But today, his expression was stormy. Naomi? He extended a hand. Naomi shook it, her grip firm. I am so sorry for what happened to you, Ryan said. You have my personal apology, and I assure you we are taking this very seriously. Naomi studied his face carefully. Did he really mean that? Or was this just another corporate damage control strategy? She was about to find out. Because she wasn't leaving that room without a real plan for change. Naomi met Leah's gaze, appreciating the quiet show of support. Anything you need, Naomi? I'm with you, Leah said softly. Before Naomi could respond, the door to the conference room opened. Ryan Whitmore stepped inside, flanked by two vice presidents. He was a tall man with a neatly groomed beard, known for his direct leadership style and unwavering focus on Orion Airlines' growth. Naomi had always respected his business acumen and his emphasis on customer experience. But today, she would see how he handled a crisis that struck at the very core of the company's culture. Ryan extended his hand. Naomi, I'm so sorry about what happened to you. You have my personal apology, and I assure you, we're taking this very seriously. Naomi shook his hand, her expression unreadable. I appreciate that, Ryan. This was a disheartening experience, to say the least. But I need to understand how Orion plans to address not just this incident, but the deeper attitudes that allowed it to happen in the first place. Ryan gave a solemn nod, motioning for everyone to take their seats. He wasted no time. We've launched an internal investigation. Carolyn, the gate agent, has been placed on administrative leave pending inquiry. We've also interviewed the staff from Flight 319, including Captain Steele, who corroborated your account. Naomi raised an eyebrow. She hadn't expected them to move so quickly, but she appreciated it. Still, this was only the beginning. I also received a threatening note on board, Naomi added, her voice tightening at the memory. I don't know if it was connected to Carolyn or a separate matter, but it was disturbing, explicit. One of the vice presidents, a woman named Lauren Kim, leaned forward. That's deeply concerning. We'll do everything possible to identify the source. It may be difficult, but we'll check passenger manifests and see if the flight attendants noticed any suspicious behavior. Ryan exhaled, running a hand over his beard. Naomi, this is bigger than just one investor's experience. No passenger should ever face discrimination. That is not what Orion Airline stands for. We've built this company on a foundation of inclusivity. Naomi locked eyes with him. And yet, it happened. In front of a crowd. So the question is, how do we fix this, long term? The room fell silent for a moment. Then Ryan spoke. We're prepared to take decisive action. Carolyn is suspended, effective immediately. We're implementing mandatory anti-bias training across all gate agents and customer service teams." He paused, then his tone softened. "Naomi, I'd like you to be personally involved in shaping these changes, not just as an investor, but as someone with valuable insight." Naomi studied his face carefully. She believed he was sincere, but she also knew corporate apologies could be empty gestures if they weren't backed by real change. "I'm open to it," she said, "but I expect real outcomes. You can't just slap a training session on top of this and call it a day." Ryan nodded. "Agreed. Once the internal investigation concludes, we'll propose a new initiative that doesn't just address bias, but prevents employees from abusing their authority in the future." For the first time since the ordeal began, Naomi felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, something meaningful could come from this. But words weren't enough. Accountability had to follow. As Naomi left the meeting, her heart felt heavier than she wanted to admit. She had spent years investing in Orion Airlines because she believed in its potential to be forward-thinking. Now the question was, would that belief translate into real progress? Later that afternoon, Naomi sat in her home office, reviewing documents. She drafted a statement about her experience, deliberating whether to make it public. The media had already caught wind of an incident involving a prominent passenger and a gate agent mix-up. Naomi had never craved the spotlight, but she knew that shining a light on injustice was sometimes necessary to create real change. Before she could decide, her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A timid voice came through the line. "Miss Ellis, I hope it's okay that I reached out. This is Emily. I work in Orion Airlines customer service department in Houston." Naomi's first thought was that Emily had new information. "Go on," she said cautiously. Emily took a breath. "I'm probably risking my job here, but I overheard something yesterday from Carolyn." Naomi sat up straighter. "I wanted to apologize," Emily continued. "Most of us don't share her views, but you should know, she was bragging, saying she finally put someone in their place. She specifically mentioned that you were a black woman and that you had no business in first class." Naomi's chest tightened. She had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed made her blood run cold. "Thank you for telling me this," Naomi said, keeping her voice steady. "Did you report it to your supervisors?" Emily hesitated. "Not yet. Carolyn is known for being a bully, and she's friends with my direct supervisor. I was scared, but after hearing about the investigation, I realized I should come forward. You deserve to know." Naomi took a slow breath. "I appreciate your courage, Emily. I won't put you at risk, but I do encourage you to report this. If Orion is serious about fixing this, your testimony could be key." Emily whispered a small, "Thank you." As the call ended, Naomi sat in silence. She wasn't surprised by Carolyn's actions, but a small part of her had hoped maybe there was another explanation. Now there was no doubt. Carolyn had done this deliberately. Naomi's resolve hardened. She was going public, not out of vindictiveness, but because Orion Airlines needed to be held accountable, and the world needed to know. Naomi sat still, processing the weight of Emily's words. She said what? Naomi had expected bias, had even suspected that Carolyn's actions weren't a coincidence. But hearing it confirmed, the gate agent bragging about putting a black woman in her place, it made her blood run cold. "I appreciate you telling me this," Naomi said, keeping her voice steady. "Have you reported it to your supervisors?" Emily hesitated. "Not yet. Carolyn has a reputation. She's close with my supervisor. I was afraid, but after hearing about the investigation, I knew I had to come forward. You deserve to know." Naomi took a slow, deliberate breath. She understood fear. She knew what it was like to feel like speaking up could put everything on the line. "I won't put you at risk," Naomi assured her. "But if Orion is serious about fixing this, your testimony will be key. Think about it." Emily whispered a small, "Thank you." As the call ended, Naomi sat in silence. She wasn't surprised by Carolyn's actions, but a part of her had hoped maybe there was another explanation. Now, there was no doubt. Carolyn had done this deliberately, and Naomi wasn't going to let it get buried. She was going public, going viral. By the next morning, Naomi had carefully crafted her statement. She posted it across her professional social media accounts, detailing the blatant discrimination she faced at the gate, the suspicious downgrade of her first-class seat, the threatening note she received on board. She left out some details for privacy, but the message was clear. Airline Airlines had a serious problem, and it wasn't just about one bad employee. Within hours, Naomi's post went viral. Thousands of people commented, expressing outrage at how she was treated, support for her standing up. Their own stories, Black women sharing eerily similar experiences, gate agents doubting their status, being ignored for upgrades, seat mix-ups that felt far too convenient. Naomi's heart ached reading them. She was not alone in this. And now, the world knew it too. Corporate damage control. Not long after, Airline Airlines' corporate communications team put out a brief statement, confirming an internal investigation, promising zero tolerance for discrimination. But Naomi knew better. A statement wasn't enough. People wanted real accountability. As she scrolled through the flood of messages, one direct message caught her eye, from none other than Ryan Whitmore. Naomi, I realize the media storm is intense. Ryan acknowledges your statement, and we stand ready to make real changes. I'd like to speak with you again today if possible. Let's accelerate our plan of action. Naomi didn't hesitate. She replied, clearing my schedule now. This was it. Her chance to push for serious change, not just corporate lip service. While Naomi prepared for her next meeting with the CEO, Carolyn's own world was crumbling. After Naomi's post went viral, she was summoned to an internal hearing. Her job was on the line, and she knew it. She called in sick, hoping to delay the fallout. But HR made it clear, if she didn't show up, she would face termination. So reluctantly, she arrived at Airline Airlines headquarters, where a mandatory disciplinary hearing was already underway, a cramped conference room. Across from Carolyn sat a stern HR representative, the union steward, a thick file of complaints, statements, and eyewitness accounts, including Emily's phone testimony. Carolyn shifted uncomfortably in her chair. For the first time, she felt real consequences looming over her. The HR representative's voice was calm but firm. You are accused of singling out Miss Naomi Ellis for different treatment. We have evidence that you deliberately changed her seat assignment without authorization, then escalated the situation by calling security. Carolyn's hands twisted together. She was being disruptive, she insisted. I was following orders from a supervisor. That seat was flagged. It's not my fault if the system messed up. The HR rep didn't look convinced. Which supervisor? Carolyn hesitated. We spoke to your direct manager, the rep continued, as well as other personnel. No one recalls any such directive. Carolyn's jaw tightened. She was trapped. Still, she tried one last excuse. Look, she said, shifting in her seat. Sometimes these high-status business travelers try to game the system. I was just making sure Miss Ellis wasn't one of them. The union steward sitting beside her shot her a warning glance. But it was too late. The HR rep made a note in the file. Carolyn swallowed hard. For the first time she understood. She was losing control of the narrative. And maybe, just maybe, she was about to lose everything else too. Carolyn's mouth went dry as the HR rep continued typing. Every word she had just spoken, documented. The union steward beside her shifted uncomfortably, giving her a warning glance. But it was too late. Outside the conference room, the media firestorm was raging. Public sentiment demanded accountability, and Airline Airlines' upper management was under immense pressure to respond. Carolyn had always assumed she was untouchable. Now, the outcome looked grim. Back at Airline Airlines headquarters. That afternoon, Naomi returned to Airline Airlines corporate offices for another high-level meeting with Ryan Whitmore and senior leadership. This time, Ryan introduced her to David Langston, the head of diversity and inclusion initiatives. David was a sharp-eyed professional, serious but genuinely committed to building a more equitable company culture. We've been planning to expand our diversity training, David said after introductions. But Naomi, your experience has shown us we can't wait any longer. We need immediate action. Naomi nodded. I've been inundated with messages from passengers who faced similar discrimination, she said. This isn't just about one bad gate agent. The entire system needs to change. Ryan leaned forward. I fully agree. Let's talk specifics. A plan for real change. Ryan laid out their immediate initiatives. A nationwide retraining program for all gate agents and customer service teams. New protocols for seat reassignments to prevent manipulation. a fast-tracked investigation process for discrimination complaints, cutting the response time down from weeks to 72 hours max. Naomi liked what she was hearing. "What about technology safeguards?" she asked. "If a seat is reassigned, there should be a digital footprint showing who changed it and why." Ryan nodded vigorously. "Yes, that's already in the works. Our IT team is developing a feature that will automatically notify passengers if their seat is changed, along with a reason code. That way, no one like Carolyn can do it under the radar." Naomi exhaled, feeling a slight relief. "Good, that will help hold employees accountable. Because without transparency, it's too easy to blame system glitches." She paused, then met Ryan's gaze. "I'm counting on you, Ryan. I'm not just an investor, I'm also a loyal customer. And right now, I need to see Orion Airlines live up to its values." Ryan extended his hand solemnly. Naomi took it. In that moment, she felt the weight of not just her own experience, but the silent struggles of countless other travelers who had faced discrimination. The final verdict for Carolyn Kess. 2 weeks later, Naomi received official word from Ryan. Carolyn had been terminated. The internal investigation revealed a pattern of misconduct, especially targeting passengers of color. Multiple employees had come forward, stating that Carolyn had openly complained about certain travelers, saying they didn't belong in first class. She had manipulated seat assignments before, but never as blatantly as with Naomi. And once the evidence piled up, even Carolyn's union steward refused to defend her further. With no real recourse, her termination was swift and final. Karma comes full circle. Days after losing her job, Carolyn's life began to unravel. Without her steady paycheck, she struggled to pay rent. Soon she lost her apartment lease, no income, no safety net. For many of Naomi's supporters, this was karma. Poetic justice for someone who had used her position to discriminate against others, only to end up powerless herself. But Naomi didn't gloat. She had always believed that bigotry was a poison, and often it destroyed the lives and hearts of those who harbored it. Still, she couldn't deny a certain satisfaction. After years of facing people like Carolyn, gatekeepers who thought they could decide who was worthy, Naomi had finally witnessed one of them face the consequences. And this was just the beginning. Naomi stepped into the executive suite at Orion Airlines headquarters, dressed in a tailored royal blue suit. Heads turned. Some recognized her from the news stories. Others, who already knew her status, whispered greetings. At the head of the long boardroom table, Ryan Whitmore stood, distributing meeting documents. When he noticed her, he smiled warmly before addressing the room. "Before we begin, I want to acknowledge Miss Naomi Ellis, whose experience helped catalyze vital changes in our company." He gestured for her to stand beside him. Naomi hesitated for a moment before rising, feeling a swirl of pride and humility. Ryan continued, "Some of you may be aware that Naomi was not only a passenger who faced an unacceptable situation, she is also one of our largest private investors. In a sense, she's my boss." A ripple of applause went through the room. Naomi couldn't help but smile. She thought back to that day at the airport, when Carolyn had treated her like a nobody, someone who had no right to a first-class seat. Now, the CEO of Orion Airlines was publicly acknowledging her power. It was ironic, but Naomi wasn't here for ego. She was here to ensure real progress, building a new standard. Over the following weeks and months, Orion Airlines rolled out new policies and training programs, many of which Naomi had helped shape. A revamped seat reassignment system with full transparency. Stronger protocols to ensure that bias was not tolerated in any part of the airline's operations. Naomi knew that no policy could erase prejudice overnight, but she felt confident that the airline was making real strides toward the inclusive, equitable experience it had long claimed to offer. A quiet shift in the skies. As time passed, Naomi continued traveling frequently for business, always choosing Orion Airlines, but with cautious optimism. She watched for signs of improvement. Gate agents seemed more attentive. Boarding protocols became more transparent. Any seat reassignment was now carefully explained to the passenger, on the spot, in full view. She even noticed a shift in atmosphere. There was a new sense of awareness among the staff, one that hadn't been there before. One day, on a flight from Chicago to New York, Naomi quietly boarded first class. As she settled into her seat, an older black woman, also in first class, passed by. She paused just long enough to meet Naomi's eyes. "Thank you," the woman whispered. Naomi felt a lump in her throat. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of generations. She nodded, offering the woman a soft smile in return. A legacy beyond business. In the months and years that followed, Naomi remained deeply involved with Orion Airlines' diversity initiatives. She became a powerful voice in corporate circles, not just for better business practices, but for ethical leadership. For Naomi, success wasn't just measured in profit margins. It was measured in the everyday experiences of travelers, the countless stories of passengers who felt seen and respected, the changes that made discrimination harder to justify, harder to ignore. She never forgot Carolyn's smirk at the gate, the threatening note on board. But she used those memories as fuel. Because at the end of the day, Naomi Ellis was more than just a wealthy investor. She was a black woman who had fought for everything she had. And she intended to keep fighting, not just for her own rightful seat, but for the seats of countless others who deserved an equal place in the sky. And there you have it. A journey that began as a routine flight but turned into a battle against prejudice. A battle that ended with the CEO of Orion Airlines recognizing Naomi Ellis as not just a valued passenger, but in a way, his boss. The twists and turns brought public outrage, private revelations, ultimate accountability. But through it all, Naomi stood firm, proving that a single voice can create real, systemic change. If this story resonated with you, don't let the conversation end here. Hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more stories that shine a light on truth and transformation. Together, we can keep pushing for progress. One story, one voice, one seat at a time.